This is the theBreaker.news podcast for the week of May 12th, 2024. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the theBreaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 342 and happy Mother's Day. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And on the Big Deal feature, the Foreign Interference Commission's interim report found China did meddle in Canada's elections, and the Trudeau Liberal government finally tabled a bill for a foreign agents lobbying registry. I get reaction on both from my guest, former Steveston-Richmond East Conservative MP Kenny Chiu. This is the Big Deal feature on the theBreaker.news podcast. On May 3rd, Foreign Interference Inquiry Commissioner Marie-Josee Hogue released her interim report. She found that China did interfere in Canada's 2019 and 2021 elections, and she called it a stain on Canada's democracy. But she ruled that it didn't change the result of the elections. 3 days later, on May 6th, Justin Trudeau's Liberal minority government tabled a bill for a foreign agents lobbying registry. Kenny Chiu was the Steveston-Richmond East Conservative MP from 2019 to 2021. He testified at the Hogue Commission about the pro-China disinformation campaign that led to his 2021 defeat. Kenny Chiu originally proposed a foreign agents registry 3 years ago, but the Liberals blocked it. Kenny Chiu is my guest. I interviewed him on May 5th about the Hogue report and again on May 8th for his reaction about the Foreign Agents Registry Bill. This interview was edited for brevity. Kenny, what was your reaction to this bill being tabled?
I think the timing is quite suspicious because, as you and I both know, the efficiency of Canadian bureaucracy is not their most well-known traits, and therefore to have expensive and in-depth changes such as what they are proposing in Bill C-70 takes a lot of time and effort. To have it released the Monday right after Judge Hogue's Friday's release of her initial report, to me, it underlines the Liberals' well-known craftsmanship of timing, and one therefore cannot be blamed for asking, even if they have drafted the legislation and the changes before Judge Hogue had summoned these witnesses and asked all the questions. In other words, the Liberals, perhaps they know about the breadth and the depth of foreign interference, and they had it prepared even before witnesses were being heard throughout the beginning of April. And I can understand that because if you recall what happened since election 2021, the Liberals have always been denying and delaying and dragging its feet. It takes several incidences to wake them up, or not to wake them up. I think they are always wide awake, to get them to terms and publicly, at least, to where we are today. Initially, if I recall, the panel of five has a report, and the report says nothing to see here. Further by the appointment of the special rapporteur of David Johnson, who also repeated that, trust me, there's nothing to see here. And then when Canadian publics and opposition politicians cry foul, that the Liberals finally succumb to pressure and agree to Judge Hogue's public inquiry in November. And so we have come a long way, definitely. And in between, it also takes, it took quite a few professional bureaucrats in our national security establishments to risk all they have and expose the incompetency the governing Liberals have in order to push and forward this agenda to protect our country. So, look back to what happened since 2021 and even 2019, right? Han Dong's nomination. I have got to say that on one hand, there is definitely deep disappointment in the government, but at the same time, I have to say that I'm cautiously optimistic. At least they have come to terms with the challenges this country is facing, not just from the Chinese communists, but also other countries interesting to infiltrate our Iranian diaspora community here in Canada and exploit disinformation by Russia. And even allegedly, the Indian government is interested to mess around with our affairs. So I'm cautiously optimistic. There have been a few things that I've seen that seem to be reasonable and good measure, and but yet I think there are still others that I like to see in, but it's not.
Now, this bill says that the Foreign Interference Commissioner would be appointed by Cabinet. However, there's a mechanism there for Cabinet, which is appointed by the Prime Minister, of course, to consult with the other parties in the House of Commons before appointing the commissioner. However, that is not binding. So it seems that ultimately the Prime Minister would have final say in who the commissioner would be, a commissioner that could have a term of up to 7 years. And of course, the devil will be in the details in compliance and enforcement, because it's nice to have an expensive commissioner with a big name and big title, but what will they do with their office? Will they use their power? Having looked at this bill, C-70, how does it differ from what you originally tabled? And how is it similar to what you originally tabled?
I think it's far more broad, and there are a couple more measures that honestly I wasn't taking into account that could have taken. For example, in my Bill C-282 that I propose, we only limit ourselves to what the federal government jurisdiction was thought to be in, and therefore we deliberately and consciously not include non-federal positions, and we thought we would have a problem with provincial governments and negotiating with them and all that. But I was pleasantly surprised to see their proposal that the schemes in the legislation would cover also in municipal and provincial governments and politicians and political activities. So I'm glad that that is the case. It's also true that they realized and decided to establish a commission in charge of the registry instead of putting it under a ministry, as I was proposing. I think if we could have a commission that is established by opposition parties, that will definitely increase further the credibility the commissioner will have, because after all, this should not be something that is highly partisan. It's about the country. One has to say. So, I think they have just tabled the legislation and the changes. If they are willing to listen, here's a test whether they are genuine in their announced intent. furthering Canada's protection. They should listen to the suggestion and make that commissioner appointment even more nonpartisan. One thing that I've kept saying to our media friends is that I'm deeply disappointed in Canada because in elsewhere in other countries, doesn't matter whether it's in United Kingdoms, the Labour and Conservatives, or in Australia, the Liberals and the Labour, or in the United States, the Republican and the Democrats. They treat these all as nonpartisan national threats and issues, and therefore there is a certain level of unity involved with it. And I'm sorry to say that the Canadian Liberals cannot be named as just like the counterparts in all the other allies that we have. And like I said earlier, they've been denying and delaying and trying to cover up and dragging its heel. So while I am pleasantly surprised by some of the measures, the writing is still on the wall whether they will continue and consistently take a more open attitude towards protecting this country.
Canadian Parliament, where the tradition has been party discipline, that the parties vote on party lines, and there isn't enough bipartisan teamwork across the aisle. How does that make you feel that the Canadian Parliament, when it comes to something as important as the foreign interference bill that you tabled in 2021, or anything that comes from an opposition politician, the odds are against it ever being debated or voted on? It's basically dead on arrival.
Well, there are two identities that I draw my strength and experience from. The first one is an idealistic, hopelessly idealistic democracy believer. I was born in a place where we have no political rights for us to exercise, to take office. And so I always see democracy as some ideal. Now, of course, having lived in Canada for 40 years, I realize that, ours is not necessarily the perfect democracy around, but I still think that we should reflect in the Canadian parliamentary system the will of the people, and to reflect what the population wants, but at the same time also take a leadership in guiding the directions of the country. So I definitely believe in democracy. At the same time, I also come from the Conservative Families Reform and Canadian Alliance tradition in local constituency. So this is why our party, the Conservative Party of Canada, it's pretty much the only party that has proposed and also voted in giving power to the caucus. I mean, you have witnessed that the caucus exercise. They voted on the first time when they gathered in a new parliament session to whether hold the power to dispose of their leader, to kick out anybody in their caucus. That was the first vote that they had to take, and that's credit to Michael Chong, who was under Stephen Harper, believing in democracy and also advancing the power of the caucus. And using this power, ironically, we were if I remember correctly, the first caucus that actually disposed of our leader in Aaron O'Toole in 2022 in January. So to answer your question, Bob, I think I definitely, that's one thing that I'm not happy with the Parliament. But if you look at the around all the party lines. Doesn't matter whether it's Bloc Québécois or NDP or the Liberals. They would have much fewer free votes that they will give to allow their caucus members to take and reflect potentially a different views from their caucus, from their party line. And from that perspective, at least I voted for banning the conversion therapy on its second reading. But, I'm not happy about it, so I voted against it in the third reading. And, I was happy that at least in the caucus, people like myself would be able to vote freely. It's a free vote. And I would like to see more of those and to deal with sensitive issues like foreign interference, issues that are impacting our country as a whole. And, democracy reform, democratic reform, it's also something that's very close to my heart as well.
What was your initial reaction when you saw her speak on May 3rd and you read the report, almost 200 pages? What was your reaction to this initial report, and do you hope that the final report will be deeper?
So I wasn't expecting too much, and I know that in Canada in general, in our Western democracy, the bar for approving something like the foreign interference operations in our political system has occurred is actually very, very high. I think I told the Commissioner Council that if you're looking for the smoking gun with certain countries' spies' fingerprints on it, well, it's not as easy as we have seen, right? Allegedly, the Indian government also hired assassins to perform killings in Canada. So they will try to keep themselves arm's length and at least appearance of an arm's length, and cover their tracks as much as possible. Besides, what we're talking about here is the world's most resourceful and experienced regime that is into foreign interference. If you talk to the Australians, the Brits, Americans, even European countries, you will learn that there has been a lot of different ways to hide their tracks. So our commission, public inquiry into foreign interference may have a good intent, but the bar is set so high that I really did not believe that we will be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that something happened. So I was pleasantly surprised to hear that at least Judge Hogue did name two ridings, Don Valley North and Steveston-Richmond East. And she went as far as to say that in Steveston-Richmond East, there are reasonable possibility that a foreign government had caused the voters in this riding to vote for other candidates instead of the one that aligned well with their values. So I think that's already the best that she could say at this moment, but I look forward to the final report to see what else is she going to find out.
I wonder if there would be a different conclusion if this inquiry was allowed to run longer, but she doesn't have much time.
The Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics Standing Committee, they asked me to testify and share my view on disinformation and misinformation this last Wednesday. I actually did bring up that even my opponent then, who happens to be a member of the ethics committee sitting just a couple meters from me, even him was, reportedly, promising to Chinese audience that he would not be supporting a foreign influence registry. If Judge Hogue and the commission has more time, they would perhaps been able to interview Han Dong's nomination opponent, say, for example, whether he or she observed anything, or maybe the current member of parliament who defeated me in 2021, MP Parn Baines, would be called to the witness stand and provide more information. So there are definitely many areas that we're not looking into, and by constraining in the terms of reference what Judge Hogue is supposed to look at, I think the government has successfully contained the worsening of the situation to the 2019 and the 2021 elections period only. And as you and I both know, disinformation and misinformation, they don't stop after the election. They don't start when the writ is dropped. And as I was sharing with media friends, that even when Han Dong was testifying with the commission on WeChat, there have been articles accusing that he was being persecuted, presumably by the commission, because of his mainland Chinese background. So that's just completely false. In fact, he's got a full participant status that is not offered to many of the parties, like, for example, the Conservative Party of Canada. So he would have access to secret documents when all the other people would not, even alleged victims. So we know that the misinformation and disinformation, these warfare, these cognitive warfare, it's continuous and it doesn't stop. And one thing that I agree with Judge Hogue is that the battleground happens a lot of times in the diaspora community. They unfortunately are being used as pawns, and these are the front lines of where the foreign interference battles are occurring.
China isn't the only country involved in foreign interference in Canada. We've got other problems, and this seems to have all gotten out of control under the Liberal government. By China, by India, by Russia, by Iran.
Imagine if you, had been Canada's closest ally, especially in the intelligence community. Would you trust Canada again, seeing that it's so weak and allow itself to be preyed upon by these countries? You probably would stay away from Canada too, and that's exactly what we're observing internationally, and that's not something that we want to see happen to Canada's stature. Never had we have suffered such a reputational bankruptcy internationally, and I think you are more optimistic than I, and I think it probably will take a change of government to correct this, and that's my view and that's my opinion. Thank you.
Kenny Chiu, former MP with the Conservative Party of Steveston-Richmond East. Now it's time on the theBreaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In the Taiwan news, Taiwan foreign minister accuses China of infiltrating allies. No risk of diplomatic breaks amid presidential inauguration, says Joseph Wu. Taiwan has been left with 12 diplomatic allies, with the Pacific island nation of Nauru being the latest to switch recognition to Beijing in January around Taiwan's presidential and legislative elections. During President Tsai Ing-wen's 8 years in office, 10 countries cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan. In Kyoto news, Japan plans to add another whale species to commercial hunting list. Japan restarted commercial whaling on July 1, 2019, after a 3-decade hiatus. The fisheries agency has been collecting opinions from the public since Tuesday regarding its plan to begin hunting fin whales, despite criticism from anti-whaling countries and conservation groups. In the Hong Kong Free Press, government bid to ban Glory to Hong Kong protest song approved by appeals court. Glory to Hong Kong, which was written and popularized during the protests in 2019, has been confused with China's anthem March of the Volunteers on the international stage. 3 Court of Appeal judges handed down the judgment on Wednesday, writing that the injunction sought by the authorities was, quote, necessary to persuade online platforms to remove the, quote, problematic videos. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In Willamette Week, a disgraced Philadelphia activist landed a job at a Portland therapy clinic. The therapist quit. In 2023, members of the American Friends Service Committee, a prominent Philadelphia-based social justice organization, renounced one of their own. It alleged that Raquel Saraswati, its chief equity and inclusion officer, who for years had claimed to be a person of Arab, South Asian, and Latino descent, was in fact a white woman. She was hired to handle equity and human resources for Full Spectrum Therapy, a Portland clinic for low-income trans and non-binary clients. Staff quit, but by all accounts, Saraswati works remotely from Philadelphia. In Crosscut, University of Washington weighs whether to revoke a notorious child molester's PhD. New self-plagiarism allegations have complicated a years-long debate about whether to rescind serial predator Patrick O'Donnell's doctorate. By 2002, O'Donnell had become known as one of the most infamous predator priests in the region. His actions helped drive the Spokane diocese into bankruptcy. He was sued, settling for $5 million he didn't have. He lost his psychology license, his role as a priest, and his reputation, but the 81-year-old still holds a PhD. In Czech news, after concerns raised, TELUS says North Island payphones will be replaced. For those who have run into an emergency in the no-cell zone between Campbell River and Sayward, there is one payphone at Roberts Lake where you've always been able to call for help. While TELUS is hanging up on the payphones, it will replace the one at Roberts Lake and the one in Sayward Valley with community phones that will have 911 service and free calling throughout BC. That's Cascadia Calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo Bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to the journalists that cover local governments around British Columbia. It's Local Government Awareness Week in BC from May 12th to 18th. Support the journalists at your local paper, website, TV, and radio stations who help you stay aware of your closest city hall and regional district. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo Bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of May 12th, 2024. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 12th of May in 2008, a magnitude 8.0 earthquake struck Sichuan, China, and it killed 69,000 people? Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter. It's free, and get updates to your inbox, or follow the Breaker News on X, formerly Twitter, for news as it happens. And you can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/thebreakernews. That's patreon.com/thebreakernews. Until next week.